Hello, friends. Hello, writers, aspiring writers, readers, whoever the hell you are who's actually listening to this podcast. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up. I appreciate you being here. This is the podcast where I sit down and talk with other writers. Before I get to today's guests, just want to mention that my company, Unbound Writer, is offering writing retreats, writing seminars. I do one-on-one coaching, and we are launching a series of online self-guided writing classes. So if you're interested in any of those things, all my insights from 20 years of writing, just head on over to unboundwriter.com. And I'll also note that if you're interested in one-on-one coaching, which I love to do, I love working with writers, I do offer a complimentary phone call, Zoom call, so we can just get to know each other and I can understand what you are looking to achieve and seeing if we would be a good fit. So you can sign up for that on my website and let's chat if that's something that you're interested in. All right, so let's get on with today's guest. So today I had the pleasure of talking to Traci Hunter Abramson. So Traci, I met Traci at a writers conference last year. We were on a panel together and she just struck me as interesting. And so I wanted to get to know her better. So I invited her to get on the podcast and we eventually got a chance to talk. So this is 6 or 8 months later or whatever it is. And two things that are particularly kind of captivating about Traci: her background in the CIA, which has fueled a lot of her, motives and her plots for her novels, but also just how prolific she is. She has, as you'll hear in the podcast, 50 plus novels and novellas out there. So that is, that's a lot. That's a lot of content. And she even kind of described early on writing 3 novels within 3 months, which is just a blistering pace that I can't even conceive of. I mean, my first book took me 3 months to write, and I've never written that fast again. So yeah, and I know everybody writes differently, but she is very prolific, and has definitely had a lot of bestsellers, and she's also an 8-time Whitney Award winner, including 2017 and 2019 Best Novel of the Year from the Whitneys. So really great stuff. And she's also interesting in the sense that she kind of describes her space, her market, is writing suspense and thrillers that are clean. So really they're age appropriate for pretty much any audience. And that's absolutely true. That is not a space that is well occupied right now. So that's a great market to be in. And she's just got a lot of interesting advice in here. I mean, she kind of started like me in the sense that, maybe she was more interested in reading and storytelling, but kind of started writing without a background in writing and really without taking classes, and just found how to develop her voice, and like me has 3 practice novels where you really do kind of use those to say, okay, that was great. I needed to build that muscle memory, but I also know that the way that I wrote it isn't the way that works. So I will just keep on until I figure it out. And that just takes time and repetition and being vulnerable and being open-minded to learning and accepting critical feedback, if not rejection, and getting better. So if you are an aspiring writer, there's a wealth of good advice in this conversation. And we made up, a dark adjacent story at the end about a dead man with a blue wig. You're going to like this one, folks. This is my conversation with Traci Abramson. Yeah, I've realized over the years that that's kind of what I'm best at, is just going in. I mean, of course I know about you, but I'm not preparing questions. I feel it's like a lot more organic and we can just talk. And, I remember we were on a panel together at BoucherCon last year. I think that's when it was. Uh-huh. And you were kind of talking about your background, and it just, I don't know, once in a while somebody just strikes me. I'm like, oh, That's an interesting person. I want to talk to them more. And certainly your background, certainly with the government was interesting, but just in general. And I'm always just fascinated by writers and just everyone's different. And to me,
Right.
that's so captivating. Like, how did you get here? So where do you live, by the way?
So I live in Virginia.
Okay, so you're DC adjacent.
Yes. DC
Uh,
adjacent is well phrased.
did you, yeah, I'm guessing you didn't grow up there, or did you?
No, my husband actually grew up here and
Okay.
I grew up in Arizona.
Okay.
So I
That's,
basically was like, when we were coming out of college, I said, I don't want to do this, live in the middle of the country when I'm from the West and you're from the East. Let's pick one.
yeah.
And so it ended
Yeah.
up being me who got recruited to the East Coast. And then he was like, yeah, I
Oh,
can get a
that,
job.
that's interesting. So it all worked out. Where in Arizona did you grow up?
Mostly Phoenix, but I graduated high school from a school called Mingus, which is really close to Sedona.
Okay.
So
Um,
most people know where that is.
and knowing kind of your ultimate career track was was storytelling at all in your childhood in terms of like this is something I want to pursue, or is it like most of us were like, yeah, authors aren't real things. Books just magically appear. Nobody actually does that.
So I think for me, it was like, I remember being like probably second or third grade. And one of my favorite series at the time was Little House on the Prairie,
Of course.
by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And she is a very talented author, and she's deceptively simple. Like it makes it seem like anyone could write a story just like she did.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I'm going to be an author. And of course, I was also going to be like, a jockey and an Olympic swimmer and all of the things that
Right. You had big dreams.
8-year-olds think they're going to do.
But
And
you
everyone's
were
like,
reading though. That's good.
oh yeah, yeah. Like I was always a voracious reader.
Yeah.
And so, but I was just like, as I was getting older, everyone's like, oh yeah, author's not a real career. Nobody makes a living doing this. And so I was a responsible child and went into finance and graduated in finance and international business.
Yeah. Well,
And then,
smart.
you know, I was like, but the storytelling was always there. I mean, I actually blame my dad because he's really scary. And I grew up in Arizona where there's no daylight savings time, and it's like I had a 7 o'clock bedtime, and so you have hours of daylight that you're
Yeah.
in bed with nothing to do other than use your imagination. So I just was always making up stories even as a child. So I
That's
think the
amazing.
storytelling is just always there.
And I've had this discussion with other authors who are of my age or thereabouts, and just that idea of exactly what you just said. What if you had a smartphone back then? Would you have just been
Yeah,
scrolling TikTok rather than reading or
right.
writing or whatever? So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. If that's killing future storytellers or if it's AI killing future storytellers, who knows? But I always think like that boredom as a childhood is definitely an ingredient
Yeah,
because I see that in a lot of my interviews. People, especially kids who maybe they were an army brat, so they're moving all the time, and so
yeah,
they don't really have a lot of close friends, and
yeah,
it becomes books. Um, but you also had foresight to know that being an author is not necessarily a great career path, which, I mean, that's pretty smart. A lot of people don't have that realization and they just go in
yeah.
blind, which is what I did. I started writing later in life, but I already had a career. So it wasn't like I wasn't never thinking this is going to make me money. I just love to do it. Uh,
Right.
but somebody whispered in your ear, like, this is a terrible idea.
A lot of people were like, yeah, it's just not real. And of course, but the funny thing is, my mom has had a television show for over 30 something years. And my sister is now she has a little local television show, and now my sister runs it. So,
So she produces it.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
they did, producing it on camera. So I'm like, okay, we clearly, I mean, my sister and I, neither one of us have a traditional career.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's so interesting, right? And there's a little bit sometimes with any artist, I think, about what is it in you that needs to be heard, needs to be
mhm,
seen. And it's funny with authors too, because authors, I think, unlike maybe a TV personality, a lot of authors don't want to be seen. They want to be read. But they don't want anyone to know anything about them because they're kind of scared of the world.
Right.
But it's all about that vulnerability and putting yourself out there a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
so you got this degree in international finance, and then what was your career path? Because I know at some point you were with the CIA, correct?
Yeah. So I was recruited right out of college into the CIA.
Yeah. And we're not
Excuse me.
talking about the Culinary Institute of America, just to be
Correct. It is the
quite
Central
clear.
Intelligence Agency. Yeah. I mean, and I didn't realize I kind of custom tailored my career or like my degree because I did, finance and international business as a double major. And then I had a minor in international relations just because I thought it was interesting. And then I also had Spanish language skills because I'd
Oh,
lived overseas.
so this is exactly you're
And
checking all the boxes.
yeah. And so it was just one of those. And I happened to, my husband being from Virginia, he knew somebody from church who worked for the CIA, and that was the recruiter that year. And he saw me as like, and I didn't fulfill the requirements. They were looking for accountants, and I was like, I don't count pennies. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'm good. But
Yeah.
pennies are just, you throw those away.
Right.
And he's like, that's okay. And I ended up being one of the two they took. Um,
Wow. Wow.
so
So, if I mean, I feel like saying something like, if you can talk about it, but I have no idea like what the rules are. Like what kind of work did you do within the organization?
I was a little bit of a jack of all trades. I
Yeah.
was on the admin side,
Yeah.
but honestly, that's probably the best place to be for what we do now as far as writing,
Yeah.
because if you know where the money's being spent, you know what's happening.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so,
So
so
you're
I had,
following paper trails and fun things like that.
yeah, like, and I was there during, like, I started, I think it was 2 months before the Berlin Wall came
Oh,
down.
wow. Yeah.
And then I was there through the entire breakup of the Soviet Union as well as the first Gulf War. Oklahoma City bombing was during my time. And of course, that wasn't us, but, it was impactful um, when we went into Panama when we were there. So a lot of things, I would get questions about, what our situation was in different places. But I did logistics, I did security, like the President's Daily Brief was under me for quite a while, as far as like
Mm.
I was one of their support. I was on the support team. Um, so like I literally did a little bit of everything. So
No. How long were you there for?
just over 6 years.
Okay. Um, and then you left, obviously. And then what
Hmm.
was your path after that?
I left because I wanted to raise my own kids.
Yeah.
And then,
Smart.
of course, all of a sudden, I was like, I have all of these hours, and my kids are pretty good kids. So I just started reading like crazy. And I had already started writing a bit. Like it was right at the end of my time with the CIA that I had borrowed a laptop from a friend and um, had written my first novel, but poorly. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
not a good writer yet, and so it took me a lot of years to craft that. But
Yeah.
I also started coaching high school swimming because I needed something to fill my time, and I was a competitive swimmer growing up, and but it was great because that connected me with even as I was growing older, I was still connected with teenagers, and so like as language patterns change and things like that, I never felt like I was really aging out of it.
Right. Right.
Because you can tell people like, oh yeah, you don't sound, you can tell by the turn of phrase that certain things are just not in today's language.
Right. Right.
So, and even to the point where I say, hey guys, I need some names. Who wants to be in a book? And so people go like, I want to be in a book. And,
Right. That's so
you know,
funny. But it's interesting. You kind of glossed over it. This happens all the time on the podcast. People just kind of throw out, oh, and then I wrote a book, and then I did this, and I think that's how we talk to each other because that's what it
right.
feels like. But the reality of it is that's a big deal, right?
Yeah,
Like
it
just
is.
writing that first novel. So did that? Where did that come from? Did that I mean obviously your love of storytelling, but did it come from I have this idea, or it's like I just want to see if I can do this?
I think part of it was just like I always have had stories in my head and I just needed to get them on paper so they'd stop bothering me.
Yeah.
And then you get bored and you're like, okay, now it's on
Right.
paper so I can go move on to the next
Right. It's
one.
almost like therapy.
Seriously, it's what if. Two
Mhm.
simple words that can create
Havoc.
thousands of novels,
Right. Right. Yeah,
So
that's how I, so with what if, and I have no idea how you do it, but I don't outline because my brain just doesn't work that way.
no, me neither.
And it is the what if. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, this person's doing this. They're in the kitchen. They're, slicing up a tomato. What if somebody broke in? What if
right.
whatever, the lights went out? And that just keeps propelling. And you don't run
Yeah,
out of those what ifs. The problem is it the right what if? And you never really know
right.
the answer to that question. But that's how I write. So it sounds like maybe you as well.
Yeah, I thought that I used to write like, okay, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
That's what I thought I did. And I've co-authored a few books, and that my co-author, that's what she does. And we were only maybe halfway through the first book together, and she said, Traci, you have no idea what you're doing. Like zero, no clue. I said, really? I didn't know that I literally just characters and a keyboard. That's my plan. And I just start
Yeah.
writing until the story happens.
Yeah. I'm exactly the same way. And like it's not better, it's not worse. It's just how our brains
Different.
work. And
Yeah.
I've tried outlining, and within, I'll either I deviate within pages,
Oh, yeah.
or I literally, like on this last book, I'm like, I'm going to outline 20% just so I have some momentum. And I sat there for 3 days and did nothing because I'm like, I
Yeah.
realized like I need my fingers to actually physically be moving
Right.
for it to start revealing itself to me, because I
Yeah.
think it's there. uh,
Yeah.
but it just is. And so I can see somebody being frustrated as a co-author. I co-authored something and we kind of outlined it together. I'm like, this is really nice because now I know
Yeah.
what to write, and it's easier. But you also lose a little bit of the organic, your intuition when
Yeah.
when a twist comes to you when you're pantsing. It's the most organic. No one's going to see
Yeah.
it coming because you didn't see it coming, and that's one of the thrills and the joys to me of writing, I
Right.
think.
Yeah, absolutely. And with my co-author, I mean, she was great. Like we would plot out like
Right.
6 to 8 scenes at a time. Like, all right, this is what's going to happen. We didn't know what would happen. And if somebody went on a tangent and we're like, hey, guess what? Our plan just changed. And we were
Right.
like, okay. So
Right. So what did you do with that first book? Did you look at it and say, like you kind of said, this is terrible, maybe this is my practice novel, or did you try to shop it, or?
so it actually worked out really well. It started out as a book that was four authors, and then two of us worked so well together. We're like, you know what? We love our characters. We're going to keep moving forward with
Oh,
our
I see.
characters. And so it worked really well because originally it was supposed to be like a connected anthology, and
Oh, I see.
it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And so I went through and kind of re-engineered some of it to make sure that it would get accepted and stuff like that. And it was a lot of fun. So it
Yeah,
was just
much easier than four people. That sounds like a nightmare.
yeah. I mean, it was magical in the way it came together, but then there were parts of it that were difficult just
Yeah,
because you have different levels of expertise within the author pool and stuff. But
right,
um, yeah,
right,
co-authoring is definitely something where even if you're going in with a friend, like write a contract
right.
because
Yeah. What
you
is
don't want to
because I know
break friendship.
you have both, right? Obviously you have, yeah. How many books do you have total now at this point?
I think I'm somewhere around 52 or 53 publications. That's including a few novellas in there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And
So,
how many of those are co-authored, would you say?
I have four so far with the fifth coming.
Okay. So obviously most of the preponderance
Most of them are just me.
is you. And when did you first start? So you're at home, you wrote a novel, and then you're co-authoring and you're raising kids, and then when does it kind of start to come together? Like I should really, really focus on this and treat it like a career, even though, the money's not necessarily
Right.
flowing in yet. Because I think that is a mind shift that's almost required, is to treat it as a
Right.
job, and give it that
Yeah.
gravity.
Well, I remember like when I first pursued publication, it was because I saw that what I was writing really wasn't in the market because it was basically the thriller suspense that was clean content. Like
Yeah.
there's no language, there's no intimacy on page. This violence is not graphic.
Right. And
And
it's
so,
not a cozy either. So,
but it's not a cozy. So
right.
if you had a cozy, it would be a cozy suspense, I guess. But but then I was also leaning into my background, and so
Right.
basically, most people, unless they're really looking for spicy scenes, I'm pretty much a catch-all author.
Yeah.
Like anyone can read me. But then I remember at one point I said to my husband, like the kids were all outside playing in our neighborhood. We live on a cul-de-sac, so of course the whole neighborhood comes out and hangs out
Right.
together in the evenings. And he came in, he was like, "Hey, everyone's out. Are you coming?" I said, "No, I really have to get some work done." And he made the comment, he's like, don't call it work or else it's no longer going to be fun. I said, and I had an aha moment. I said, "You know what?" I said, "I have to call it work or else you guys aren't going to respect that I need to put the time in."
Yeah. A hundred
And
percent.
at that point, he's like, "Oh, okay,
Right.
I get that." I was
Yeah.
like, "It's still fun. It's still, I could even call it a hobby at the time." But I'm like, I do have deadlines now and I need to make them. And if I'm hanging out, for the next 4 hours with the neighborhood, this edit's not getting finished.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and that's so smart. And I think that's, in my when I do coaching and teaching, we talk a lot about the writer's psychology because that's
yeah.
exactly it. Because you see these aspiring authors who have maybe multiple books that they've written
Hmm.
and they diminish themselves so quickly. They're like, oh, it's
Yeah.
just a stupid little hobby that I do.
Right.
And that manifests itself in a negative way, I think. And the
Right.
opposite, you treat it as and sometimes it is work. Sometimes it's not fun
Oh,
at
yeah.
all. It's like data entry and you're
Oh, I'm in the
frustrated.
middle of it. Yeah. I'm in the middle of an edit. And I'm like, I forget every time how bad this is going, oh, I've got to remember the book that I wrote a year ago, you
Right,
know?
right. And you have to, and unlike maybe traditional work, corporate work, you can't half-ass it. Like
Uh-uh.
if you're editing, you're only diminishing yourself if you're
Right.
like, it's good enough. And I think that surprised me as an author is how hard that is to
Yeah.
be so in the moment, so focused, and so committed to making things better. After a few pages, you're exhausted, like,
Oh,
because you're
yeah.
not used to that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Even
and I
though,
mean, and it's different skill sets for writing and drafting a book, and then also it's a different skill set to edit and polish a novel. And
totally.
and you really go through, like, even though I have so many books I've already written, you're always going with the next one saying, I don't want to disappoint my fans. I don't want to disappoint my reader, or I want to make sure that if somebody reads me for the first time and it's this book, it's worth their time and that they might be interested in something else I've written.
Right, right. And sometimes you're not even a great judge of that.
Right.
Because I feel like for me, I get inspired by an idea or a loose thread of an idea and I'm just off to
Uh-huh.
the races. And there is that kind of like, I don't know if anyone's going to want this. I don't know if my publisher's going to want it, much less readers.
Right.
You just don't know. But you get to the point where you're like, I'm enjoying this. I would want to read this. And that has to be good enough because
Right.
after a certain number of books, you're like, that's all I have to fall back on, but you still don't know.
Well, and I think when we're in the drafting stage, we have to give ourselves permission to write what we want.
Right.
Like, just don't worry about anyone else. We're writing for ourselves at that point. And if we do that, most of us have enough of a common ground with other people that somebody else is going to be in the same space of wanting to read what we've written. It's the
Yeah.
polishing stage and editing. We're like, okay, the editor's trying to make me better. I need to remember that even if I don't agree with what they're telling me to do, there's probably a problem I could make it better, in this spot.
Yeah. And a lot of that is having your trusted group, which might just be
Yeah,
one person. I don't know. Like at this
yeah,
stage of my career, it's three people for me. It's my partner, who's the first person
yeah,
to read it. It's my agent and it's my publisher,
right,
who I'm getting edits from. And I don't workshop anymore because I'm like, I don't need that anymore. Like,
right,
and you don't want to be cocky about it, but you're like, I don't, I want my voice to be strong in
right.
this, but it takes years to develop that skill of like because if you listen to everybody, you're going to have a horrible book.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's really, there's three things you're looking at: is how you wrote it, how somebody else is telling you that you should write it, and then what really will be the best option.
Right, right. And there's got to be something, you know, those moments where somebody says something about your manuscript and it's almost like a whole body feeling in a good way. You're like, oh my God, that totally resonates with me.
Yeah,
Why didn't I think of that? You're like,
right,
pay attention to that person, stay close to that person
right,
because they think like you, but they're seeing it from a different perspective. And
right.
that's hard to do. Um, and then at what point were you just like, hey, this is working? You know, I've got a publisher who's buying my books. Now I'm committed, and like, this is how I'm going to spend the rest of my life.
I mean, it didn't take long. I think it was probably so my first books, I did a trilogy and I was thinking, okay, this is it. This is my one idea. I'll never have anything else again. You know, that's good enough. And and then off the trilogy, I had an idea of something else. So I was like, oh, this would be fun. And then I did another one. And I wrote like three books in about 3.5 months. So
That's
it was just
amazing.
it just like I just got into a really great routine and you know, I had most of my kids were in school and I had a baby at home and so like, all right, as soon as he hits nap time, that's my writing time. And I would close the doors, close the blinds, wouldn't
Yeah,
answer the phone. I mean, the kids even were trained, hey, if there's an emergency at school, call twice.
right.
If the phone doesn't ring twice right after each other, then I'm ignoring it. I'm not going to pick it up. So I
Yeah,
mean, my children were trained very young on
yeah, yeah, right.
code and
Right. Protocol.
yes. So it's like this is how it works. But you know, but it really was at that point where I started treating it like a career. I'm like, these are
Yeah,
my hours. This is when I do it.
yeah.
Um, and
But
and a lot of it's muscle memory. I mean,
it
you
is.
know, like I mean, in today's world, most of the time I do a lot of my writing actually while I'm on my treadmill or on my exercise bike. I know it sounds crazy, but I have like this little old-fashioned word processor that I can put on my treadmill and then I have a desk on my exercise bike.
Oh
And
my
so
goodness.
but when I'm moving, my brain is working differently. And I
Yeah.
find if I do that first thing, then I can get at least 1,000 to 1,500 words. And then it may take me 6 more hours to get the next 600 words that I want to do,
Yeah.
you know, to
Wow.
finish out my day.
Wow.
But yeah, but it used to be, all right, this is the time I sit down and it's at this desk and with the quiet or whatever. And some people it's like, all right, with this music and
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, you
Everyone's
just
different.
it's everyone's different and it can change from you know as you progress in your career. Like there's certain times family dynamics change or whatever, or your situations change and
Well, and to your point, I think that muscle memory changes because I remember early on, and I don't know what you did. I'd be curious to hear, but I started writing literally out of the blue one day in my early 30s. It was a
Mhm.
real weird epiphany moment, and it was kind of this exercise to stave off boredom, and it turned into this manuscript. And I had no background in writing. I was barely a reader. And so I'm like, I should really be curious and pay attention to this. Why am I doing this? And I realized I love to do it. But my first three books didn't sell, but those first three books, it's hand to hand combat, every sentence.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's so hard. And then you like exercise, you build the muscle, and you're like, now that I know what I'm writing, I know how to write. It just flows
Right.
out of me. But early on, and I don't know, did you,
I
aside from
kind
your
of
love of books, did you have any kind of training when you first started?
no, not really. I mean, I was just a reader, and it's interesting that you have three books that didn't sell because my first three were the ones that I call them my practice novels.
Totally.
And then it was my fourth book, the fourth novel I wrote sold. And ironically, during COVID, I went back to my very first novel that I'd written, and I'd taken a prologue, and we were doing a like a fundraiser for another author who was struggling with some health issues, and so a bunch of us put an anthology together and gave him the rights to earn some money. And so I was like, you know, I could go ahead and let me rewrite these. I love the story. Let me rewrite it. So I rewrote it and it turned in and this shows you the difference of how you are when you start writing versus when you are a little more polished. What was one book ended up being two novellas and two novels. And then it spurned another novella and novel. So it was like a six
That's amazing.
publication.
Right. Because the
But I was,
idea was there. It was
but the
just
idea
wasn't
was
well
already there. But
executed.
I took the old manuscript and I set it down. I'm like, this is reference only. I'm not using anything in there. I'm just going to write. And I
Right.
would flip through and be like, okay, yeah, this scene needs to be here, and
Oh, that's
and
so
figure out where to
interesting.
break it. But yeah, it was.
And
So so some of those old ideas are still good. It's just, but I also was like, let me try different things. I'll do first person or third person and, show that I can do it all. It's like, no, you're better off figuring out what your voice is, what's your natural space. Not that some people can't switch back and forth, but,
no.
I found third person, multiple point of view is my spot. Like
Right. And it's so funny you say that because I have this conversation all the time because I believe that finding the POV and the tense that is organic and flows from you is kind of synonymous with finding your voice.
yeah.
And that was my fifth published book, my eighth book, where I switched to present tense, first person, singular point
Uh-huh.
of view, and I'm a female point of view. I'm like, why did this just flow? And now that's
Yeah.
almost all I write. And I agree with you. It's like, people talk about, well, what POV serves the story? And I don't disagree with that, but I think it's like, what are you good at? What is your
Right.
voice and what are people going to expect? And I realized I'm first person present. I love being inside one person's head who there's a
Right.
lot of things they don't know. And
Yeah.
that's exciting to me.
And I think, to your point, it's what's going to serve the story the best is what you can effectively communicate in the best way.
Right.
So,
Totally.
it's
And
just going to be
I think
different.
about what you do, third person pass, multiple points of view. And I love reading books like that. But I read books like that. I'm like, yeah, I could do this. I don't think I would do it well because it's a real balancing act. I might have two points of view in a book, both probably first person present tense. One of the points of
Right.
view is probably going to be minor. Um, so to understand how to reveal information from different perspectives, how not to stay too long in somebody's voice before the
Yeah.
reader wants to go back to the other one or the other four. Because I'll pick up some books and then I have 5 points of view in the first 5 chapters, and I'm just like, this isn't working for me.
Right.
This is homework.
Yeah.
Because
Because,
I'm not that kind of reader.
well, and also it's a challenge when you're doing multiple points of view to make sure that you're connecting enough the reader to the character that the character is now memorable.
Right.
And you're not
Right.
having to feel like I need to make a list of who the characters are.
Right. And they don't all sound the
They
same,
don't sound the same. Yeah.
which is a real skill to do. I find that very challenging
Yeah.
to do that because not everyone's good at doing that. Um, and you kind of mentioned earlier in our conversation, you brought in or you leaned on some of your previous work experience with the government, and maybe not all of your books, but certainly some of your books, I
Yeah.
assume. Is there some kind of clearinghouse process to like, hey, can I write about this or approvals?
Yeah. So I have a lifetime agreement with the CIA that everything I write that has to do with my intelligence background has to clear through them.
Yeah.
So, but luckily the CIA is pretty efficient. They're very supportive. Usually I get it back within 30 days.
Wow.
So,
Now,
so yeah,
does that attitude change with different administrations, or is it like kind of because I'm assuming not all the same people, you're not going to the same people every time.
well, it's the review board. And
Okay.
so a lot of times they will have like the same people, reading through them and stuff. So, I mean, and people move on and retire and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally they've been great. I mean, at one point I said, "Hey, do I really need to send you my military action?" Like I have a few series that have to do with like Navy SEALs and things like that. And they're like, "Well, let's look at your file." And they're like, yes, you do."
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting because you could have somebody who wasn't in the military or wasn't in the government write those exact same scenes and
and they're
nobody's
fine.
got to prove anything because
Right.
so you're being held to this higher standard because you put in place but it also gives you latitude to write about stuff other people maybe can't write about.
Right. And part of it was two of my years, it was during the first Gulf War that I was a liaison officer with
Okay.
the agency. And so I was dealing with everybody else in the military and the intelligence world, just a lot of other organizations. And so because of that, I have a good understanding of what the NSA does or the DIA or, the
Right.
different military organizations. And, I can tell you that which ones are terrible with their finances, but man, you want something built, Army Corps of Engineers, they're your guys, but don't
Right.
ask them to send you the bill.
Right.
And, it's the little things like that. And I think a lot of it is when I'm writing, because I've experienced it, it just naturally weaves in if it's appropriate,
Yeah.
but I don't have a need to share what I've learned
Right.
as somebody who has researched.
Right.
And so I think it kind of has a different tone when you have somebody who's been on the inside, because
Yeah.
you don't have to fight to make it sound natural, because it just is.
How do you deal with, just out of curiosity, considering sounds like maybe this is like 25, 30 years ago, changing times, you want to write something contemporary and you're like, I don't know if this protocol has changed. Are you connected that you have people that you can ask questions to who are in those positions now?
Um, a little bit. I don't really ask too much, but I mean, I live just south of Quantico Marine Base, which is home
So
of
you just go out
FBI
for a run and
Academy.
find somebody and
And so,
interview them?
I joke. I'm like, yeah, I go to church on Sunday, and there's another half dozen ideas. You just walk through the
Oh,
halls,
I'm
and
sure. Yeah.
it's like you've got the basic schools there, the officer candidate schools at Quantico. You've got FBI. It's
Yeah.
I've got people that I'm going to church with who are the extras in the
Right.
Hogan's Alley, scenarios and stuff for FBI Academy. And so
That's
it
great.
doesn't take much.
Yeah.
People can talk and they kind of code talk, but once you've been inside, you're like, oh, I know what that
I
means.
know how to translate that.
I can translate, like, or even just all of a sudden a few people don't show up and it's like, oh, interesting.
That's data.
Well, based on
Yeah.
the news, I would guess that this is what happened. And you just connect dots in a way,
Right.
because that's what you were trained to do.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Which makes a compelling protagonist when you are in their thought process going through that as a
Yeah.
layperson, being like, oh, that's pretty fascinating. Have you had much pushback on stuff from the review board over the years?
No, I think I've only been redacted 2 or 3 times. And
And
usually it's
redacted
like,
meaning like massive passages or a
no,
sentence here and there?
like delete these 3 words,
Oh,
or
okay. So
we
yeah,
here's an element issue, and we think that the easiest thing would be if you do this. And it's like, okay, great. I think it's been 3 times, and the third time I went back and I'd used a word that I thought I wasn't able to use, and I'd forgotten, because when you're writing, you write in the language you're used to, and then you just go search and replace anything that you're not supposed to use.
right,
And
right.
I had left one in, and I was like, okay, you told me that I couldn't do this, but then this was left in. Are you okay? And they're like, oh yeah, we're fine with this now. And we looked at it, and you're fine. What you had before is fine. I'm like, you made me scrub everything and send you all of my like everything. It was all
Right.
shredded and disposed of. I said, I don't even know what I had originally because you
Oh
guys
my
made me get rid of
goodness.
it all. And I was like, that's okay. Whatever we have now is gonna be what it is.
And does the review board ever actually review your book? They're like, oh, I didn't see that twist coming. That was amazing.
They never say anything content-wise. It's actually kind of
I'm sure they
funny. They're just
don't, but
like,
that would be
you
awesome.
are approved, or we have no objection to anything that was contained in this manuscript. And, if you make significant changes, and,
Wow.
send it back.
How have you seen, over the course of, 50 plus novels and novellas, how have you seen yourself change in terms of what you want to write and, other spaces that you might be interested in?
And I think it's mostly just taking, today's world and seeing and kind of just tweaking it into that space again.
Yeah.
Um, because I started a couple of new series with a different publisher. One came out in October, one actually just came out this month, and so that's been fun to get. It's the first ones that I've had come out in hardback. Everything been trade paperback before that.
Yeah.
That's been
Yeah.
fun because it's creating a new world. Because most of my books, my original series, even though in different series, they'd still kind of interconnect. Like
Yeah.
if I need a special forces team, I'm like, oh, I know who these people are. Let me use that one because I don't have to name them. Because
Right.
naming characters when you're this many books in, it's hard.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's just hard.
That's interesting. Well, and as I'm kind of going through an exercise right now, when you have characters who pop up in different books, even if they're standalones, once you get
Yeah.
to the film TV rights thing, it's a huge mess, which I
Oh
didn't know
yeah.
anything about. And now we're going through that right now, where it's like,
Oh, fun,
well, yeah, you've got this character who
fun-ish.
has like 2 lines in this book, but this other company owns the option of it. So they can't,
Uh-huh.
I'm like, oh, well, I wish I'd known that before I'd written those two lines.
Right.
So yeah, you never know. Well, Traci, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a little bit of our storytelling. This is the making it up portion of the show. I've chosen 3 books at random from my bookshelves. You're going to choose one of those books. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page, and that'll be the first sentence in like a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read
Okay.
that sentence. You give me the next sentence or two that comes to your head. I'll do a sentence or two, and then we'll call it quits when it gets dreadful. It usually gets very dark very fast, by the way. I've got Lee Goldberg's Dreamtown, L.R. Jones's The Wedding Party, and I'm going to butcher this name, Harini Nagendra's A Nest of Vipers.
Okay, we got to do Lee's book since he's former CIA too.
There you go. There's the connection. That is funny because I did kind of just randomly grab these. So give me a page between 1 and 270.
161.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly scan 161.
See if we find a good one.
Yeah, a lot of
He's
dialogue
got to
on
have
this
something good in
page.
there, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. Um, oh my goodness. Do we want a piece of dialogue? All right, I'm going to read this and you do whatever you want with this. I'm not even sure this is going to make a lot of sense. So it's a character named Eve talking to somebody, and Eve says, I know, but it's one thing to shoot on the street. It's another thing for you to do it where I work.
Oh, that's a good line.
That is a good line.
Okay, so read it to me again.
Yep, I know, but it's one thing to shoot on the street. It's another thing for you to do it where I work.
Okay, so then I would probably go with, but if you didn't work in such a dark place, I wouldn't consider bringing a gun.
Eve considered what he said, realized he was probably right, but it did nothing to quell her anger at him. She could still smell the gunpowder in the air, but that wasn't the most distracting thing. What was the body 10 feet away from them.
But she didn't know the body. So did she really care why he was shooting, or should she really find out what what the man was doing there and why he was wearing a blue wig?
She walked over to the corpse, face down. She could tell the wig was the cheap kind, the kind you would get at Spirit Halloween, maybe $6. The blue was slowly starting to mix with red from the gunshot wound in the back of his neck. She nudged him with her shoe. He didn't move.
But even worse, the blood was getting on her favorite rug that she had just bought three days ago, and it was supposed to be a birthday present from her best friend.
Oh, I think we call it there. I think that's a good place to leave it. There's a world of possibilities that could happen next. Who was the guy with the gun? Who was the guy in the blue wig? Where does she work? Does she work on the street? Who knows? All these questions.
And why that rug?
Right. That rug, it has to be important. Well, Traci, I'm glad we finally got a chance to connect. I hope I see you at either Thriller Fest or BoucherCon again this year. I'll be at
Be
both
it both.
events. Oh,
So,
great. Then I'm sure we'll run into each other. And yeah, thank you for sharing your insights today. Great talking
well,
to you.
thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that is it. That is my conversation with Traci Hunter Abramson. Great conversation. She, again, a wealth of knowledge, a lot of experience, 50 plus books. She knows what she's doing. Her latest book, I should mention, is Novel Threat, so make sure to check that out. And you can go read all about her at her website, which is just traciabramson.com. And you can hop on over to mine, carterwilson.com, and explore my books, my podcast, my blog, all that kind of stuff, and head on over to unboundwriter.com if you're looking for help with your writing. That's it, folks. That is it for now. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. Another one out just next week. In the meantime, as always, thank you and take care.